Hello, folks. This is your host, Charlie Dixon. Before we get started today, we would really like your help. Please rate and review our podcast with 5 stars and make sure to share it with a friend. By spreading the word, you help us grow and reach more people, allowing others to discover the valuable insights shared in each episode. Thank you so much for being an important part of the Behavioral Health Today community.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. Well, we have an opportunity today to do a Clinicians Series in our podcast. My guest for today's show is Amy Pickett-Williams, a seasoned licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist with over 25 years of experience in Denver, Colorado. Amy specializes in grief, trauma, and somatic therapy, and is the founder of LIGHT, which is an acronym for Love in Grief Held Together. And that's beautiful. LIGHT is a movement dedicated to collective support and healing. Drawing from her personal and professional experiences, Amy integrates mind, body, and spirit into her work. In addition to her psychotherapy practice, she is a certified yoga teacher and has extensive experience in medical, school-based, and private practice settings, serving clients of all ages. We're excited to have Amy with us today to discuss the holistic and inclusive approach to the LIGHT movement, highlighting its commitment to addressing various forms of grief through somatic healing, creativity, and connection. Amy, welcome back to our show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be back.
It's really nice to have you. Amy, in our first show, and again, listeners, I'm going to encourage you to go back and listen to our first show with Amy. She was such a wonderful guest, and we had such a great talk around grief and what it is and her own story. So I would encourage you to go back and listen to that. But as we start out today, Amy, give us just a sense of what LIGHT is, the LIGHT movement, and what you all are doing.
Absolutely. So LIGHT stands for Love and Grief Held Together. And we always know that there's love with grief or some sort of attachment when we experience grief and loss. And the held together fits with the love and grief, but it also fits with co-regulation and connection with other human beings and honestly, animals as well. And so LIGHT stands for that very purpose. We have 4 goals within the LIGHT movement. The first is to remind people they're not alone in their grief. The second is to teach the science of grief and the somatic tools to support integration and finding purpose and meaning. The third is connecting with many other resources to support others with grief and loss. And the fourth is to stand in solidarity for all people and all types of loss. Death and dying, obviously, but also loss of relationship, loss of health, loss of sense of safety, loss of sense of peace, loss of sense of self. You name it, loss of finances, loss of home. It spans the entire gamut. It's the one thing none of us are immune from.
I was going to say, none of us gets out of life without grief and loss, do we? We just don't. How nice to know we're not going to be alone and how there is a science behind it that we can actually tap into with your help and with your kind of expertise, along with the resources, but also not being alone because there's going to be solidarity in that. Hey, just real quick too, since we last spoke, you guys have grown. Tell us about that.
Exponentially.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So almost exactly a year ago, we had our very first event. And obviously I met with you all after that, which was, we'll speak to that a little bit, I think at the end of the podcast, but it's a night to eliminate grief on the solstice. From there, we formed our nonprofit. And it was, I think the last time I met with you all, we had just formed our nonprofit, which is really exciting. We're still all volunteers, but our volunteers have grown exponentially. We're close to 100 different volunteers doing different things. Our goal is not only locally here in Colorado, but nationally and globally. We had a 20-hour training that had continuing ed credits for psychologists and social workers and nurses. We are going to be doing more trainings in this coming spring. We have a big burnout retreat coming up in the next couple months, and our classes have grown exponentially as well, both in person here in the Metro Denver, Colorado area, and also our virtual platform. Our goal is to really expand that because we've had such interest We've been fortunate enough to reach the media and been on some articles as well, which has brought different abilities for different countries to check in. I've been on podcasts all the way in Australia and England. So
Is
it's
that right? That's
been
so
really
cool.
an amazing experience to be able to get this information out because it's so needed.
Congratulations. It's always, well, it's always fun to grow, but
Mhm.
to grow with such a wonderful program that it's not like it's even reaching international status here, recognition. Congrats on that. That's great. Well,
Thank you.
today's series is part of our today's podcast, is part of our clinician series. And in our clinician series, we want to take folks behind the proverbial therapy door. We want people on
Mhm.
the show to understand what therapy can be about or what approaches can be about, whether it's therapy in a clinician's office, if it's a group and some of the practices that you guys do with light movement,
Mhm.
to give people a sense of, hey, if I were to go into this, what would I be experiencing? So let's kind of dive in a little bit, some of the strategies and some of the practices that you
Mhm.
folks have in place around the light movement and in addressing grief.
Yeah. So, as I shared in that previous show, I've been a grief therapist for 25 years and I was trained in talk therapy, like most of us were. But through the years of my work of being a yoga teacher and really studying somatics, I started to recognize that there's so much more to just talk. And the science behind that is the vagus nerve, which is our 10th cranial nerve, as I talked about in that last show. But what's so important is that communication. It goes both ways, the communication, brain to body to brain, but it goes 80% body to brain, 20% brain to body. So talk therapy serves a purpose, a very important purpose in holding space and sharing. But what we really realize is that we have to utilize our body in therapy to help us decrease the symptoms of trauma, grief and loss, anxiety, depression. And so that's one of the reasons why the light movement is there is to teach about why we need to utilize our body within a therapeutic setting and how we use our body within a therapeutic setting.
I think it's a great reminder you're giving us around the vagus nerve. We know it goes through our whole body. We know that we can influence that with movement, with breath in some very, very impactful ways. We also know through, Van der Kolk's work that the body holds the trauma. And
Mhm.
what I love is that you have these approaches and ways of helping people work through a somatic experience,
Mhm.
working through the yoga and other things that you do. I know that you have three somatic practices and tools with these. Walk us through these and what
Yeah.
people experience in each one.
Yeah. And within the three kind of main areas that we focus on in light, there are many tools that fit within each one of them, which is really exciting. And the three main areas are bidirectional, bilateral experiencing. So we know that a lot, those of clinicians that do EMDR and brain
Okay.
spotting, goes both sides of the brain, both sides of the body. But we also know that walking, swimming, yoga, gardening,
Yeah.
cooking, any of those
Journaling.
things use
Yeah.
both sides of the body, right?
Yeah.
And so if we're intentional about that, that can be very supportive in our growing with our grief and healing from trauma. So the bi-direction, bi-stimulation is one area. Another area that's really, really important is stimulating the vagus nerve, like we were just talking about a minute ago, right? And that can be done through vibration, such as humming. It's utilized with the longer exhale, with breathing. There's acupressure points in the ears with the nerve endings connecting to the vagus nerve, even though the vagus nerve is center in our body and it goes both
Yeah.
ways. There's many different nerves and cranial nerves that connect to the vagus nerve. So acupressure is another beautiful one as well. So
Yeah.
breathing, humming, acupressure are three great ways to stimulate the vagus nerve. And then the third one is the contraction and the expansion that we think of a lot with yoga, but we also utilize that with swimming, with hiking, with walking. And that's the expanding into and being able to share who we are, our story, leaning into our grief, leaning into our pain. And then there's the contraction when we need to quote withdraw back and say, I'm not quite ready. The part that's important with somatic work, though, is the pendulating back and forth, and not getting stuck. And so those three areas, right? The stimulation on both sides of the body, stimulating the vagus nerve, and the contraction and the expansion are three big areas that we utilize in light movement with somatic practices.
You know what I so appreciate about that, Amy, is that, you know, for me to come in and talk about my grief, my loss, and to bring that to a conversational level requires me at some level to think, feel, and re-experience the
Mhm,
things that I just went through. And maybe I don't have a readiness for that. And
mhm,
maybe for a while I may not have a readiness for that, but I might have a readiness to take a walk with you. I might have
mhm,
a readiness to take a yoga class. I might have a readiness to maybe to learn some breathing techniques. I might be able to
mhm.
use bilateral stimulation in a way where I'm activating the left and right sides of my brains. It helps me facilitate through, different brain functions. Just some phenomenal research around that. In fact, we're doing some research ourselves, my colleague and I, around this and in working through traumas. And so I love the fact that we've got these non-traditional talk therapy approaches that are
Mhm,
powerful, particularly with the 80-20 piece of the vagus nerve, the
mhm,
body doing the work around this, the brain being the benefactor of that, and then
mhm.
helping us to maybe before I'm ready to start talking about it, already start some of that grief work. I
That's
love
right.
that piece.
That's right. That's right. And I think that contraction and expansion piece is so important. At every grief and trauma informed yoga class that I teach, I speak to, if you're feeling physical pain, please back off. But if you're feeling mental, emotional, or
Yes.
spiritual discomfort, you have a choice to lean
Yes.
into it in a place of curiosity or back off or pendulate, right? Which is the ultimate goal of leaning in and then saying, not yet, back and forth, back and forth. And it's the pendulating also with bilateral stimulation too, right? When you think about some of the other tools like EMDR as well.
Yeah. When you say lean in, I use that phrase a lot as well. I'm encouraging people to lean into their emotions. I mean, we can't heal until we feel at some level.
Mhm.
But when you're talking about leaning in, what are you encouraging folks to do? And maybe I might kind of role play a little bit with you here, but when you talk about leaning in, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think the first word is, and what I just said a second ago is being curious, right? Like leaning into what are the physical sensations you're feeling in your body right now? And then noticing maybe what emotions are coming up in those
Mm,
physical sensations. What are the thoughts coming up as you're leaning into that physical sensation, right?
mhm.
Anything with spirit, whether it's, the divine within themselves or a higher power or a combination of both. All of those things are very important in grief work as you work with someone. So the first step of leaning in, I think, is being curious of what you're noticing. And some people are so detached from their
Yes.
body, right? It's a curiosity of like, so you're not noticing anything right now. Yet it's funny when I'm spending time with you right now, I notice your shoulders are really down, right?
Mm,
And I notice that you're grasping at your chest or your belly as you're telling me this, or you're wringing your hands a lot.
yes.
Can you tell me about why you're doing this? Right? It's curiosity.
So bringing to awareness things that we may not be curious or not aware of, but maybe we can develop a curiosity around and maybe an awareness of, hey, maybe there is something going on.
Mhm.
Maybe I feel numb. Maybe I feel like there's nothing happening whatsoever, but there is.
Yeah.
And kind of maybe beginning to itch down into some of those things, say, hey, I wonder what might be there. That's the leaning in piece. I love the piece you're saying too of the pendulum nature of it, leaning in, but also the permission to lean back out.
Mhm.
I may not have been in charge of my loss
Mhm.
or my grief or what happened in that trauma, but I want to be in charge of my healing. And
Mhm.
what you're saying here is when I have the ability to kind of pendulum this, I have some control in that, and that feels like a nice permission you're giving me.
Yes. Yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Say more about this idea of the contraction piece. You talked about maybe some of the things we typically have, like yoga or swimming or hiking. What's the idea behind the contraction?
Yeah. Well, that's part of the grieving process. So it's like withdrawing in, right? We all do that in that experience. And it's an important part of it. The challenge is if we get stuck, right? And
Right.
so the difference between, everyone that experiences trauma experiences grief. Not everyone that experiences grief experiences trauma. And the big difference is with trauma, as you all know, is that, we get stuck in our nervous system state, right? And so, but within even grief, we can temporarily get stuck. Trauma, we have more of that paralysis, either in that sympathetic fight flight state or in that dorsal state below the window where we're immobile, right? Mobilization, activation, hyperarousal, or hypoarousal. So that contraction, a lot of times, is that hypoarousal where we just can't move. And so it's an important piece. And yet we need to recognize it and then maybe do some gentle things to bring us out of that contraction, knowing full well we can always come back, back and forth, back and forth. And that's part of that process of grief.
You described that contraction piece, that back and forth, and the permission to be able to do that. And my being able to be in charge of that, it's like I'm building, we often, it's like in the mental health field, refer to as kind of affective tolerance, but really it's emotional muscle. My emotional muscle to be able to hold this grief so that I can work through it, whatever we're going to say that may be, or work to a place of acceptance. And as we're building that emotional muscle, what would you say is the ultimate goal of, in quotes, working through grief? What are we working towards?
Yeah. I think the biggest one is integrating our experience. Well, it'll always be a part of us. And I
Yes.
believe, as I shared in that last episode, we really see it as that scar. Like if there's lightning that hits a tree, that scar will always be
Yeah.
there. But the ultimate goal is we grow,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's always will be a part of us, but it's not ever consuming all of us.
Yeah. I like that piece that we are going to grow from this and we will get through it if we can do some right things. It can really also stall us. I've worked with somebody who lost a family member to a tragic motor vehicle accident very early on. And her whole life, sadly, from her parenting to her professional life to her friendships, has been just so stuck and so defined by that loss. Sadly, for her, and I'm curious about your thoughts in this, is that she assigned a personal responsibility for not having followed an intuition in that
Mhm,
moment to
mhm.
maybe warn the person off of maybe going out that day type of thing.
Yeah.
And that's been a very haunting, very, very traumatic piece that's kept her stuck. And we're doing some other work around this at a non-cognitive kind of traditional therapy level. But that self-meaning is I'm responsible and really keep people stuck. Tell me what you notice in that.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that from that cognitive standpoint. We talk about children having magical thinking.
Yes, exactly.
But in reality, we all have it all the way through, until we die.
That's right.
And when we experience those or traumas, those early losses, a lot of times we can get stuck in that magical thinking. Right. And
Yeah.
so when you said it happened early on, I'd be curious if, she was a child when the experience happened, or a young, a teenager. And so we then get stuck.
Well, here's a curious piece that you're raising, right? Maybe we can kind of dip down in this a bit together. Is she had another trauma early on in her life where some physical boundaries, sexual boundaries were crossed when she was a little girl, not believed and very traumatic, but made to feel like I was responsible for that.
Yeah.
And so we're watching this self-meaning develop very early on and then come into a later event when she was an adult. It was her
Mhm.
partner. And then the same kind of thing happened. And now there's this reminder that the things that go wrong in my life, it's me that's
Mhm.
responsible for this. So yeah, I wonder if what you might find too, as people are working through current grief, how maybe other losses come into play.
Yes. Always. Grief triggers grief, triggers grief.
Triggers
Yeah.
grief, yeah. It's like
Yes.
I sometimes look at it like a piano chord where you hit and it reverberates all the way back, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes. And it's so interesting, when I work with all ages in my practice, as young as 3 to my oldest right now, I think is 78. And a lot of times when I'm working with parents and they come in and like, my kid is so out of control after their dog died or,
Yeah.
after experience, and the parent is so activated. I'll say, tell me a little more about what it was like when you were 6, this
So
age of
good.
your child.
So
Mhm.
good. I love that piece of it because sometimes those around are activated unknowingly, and they're the
Mhm.
ones that are being looked to be the supports.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right. And in reality, the 6-year-old kid that I'm working with is really grieving very appropriately, right?
Yeah.
And it's up to the parents to recognize, like, wow, this is really triggering stuff in me from my losses and my
Yeah.
traumas.
What have you found to be the biggest hurdle? And this is again going beyond kind of the behind the therapy door. When you have found someone really just being really stuck
Mhm.
and almost kind of having this kung fu grip on this, and they know it's kind of irrational, and you know that it is, and yet they're holding on to it. for a reason. It's not by mistake. It's for a reason. They may not know why, but what do you understand that holding on to that being?
Yeah. I think a lot of it goes back to that window of tolerance, right? In that last show, we talked a lot about how so many times when people come into therapy, their window of where they're able to be and their functioning everyday state is like the size of like a little mouse window or a
Right.
dollhouse
Right.
window. And so they are stuck because it's really hard to get into that tiny little
Yeah.
space, right? And so I think some of the work that we do is not only how to get back into that window, but if the window's super tiny, they're not going to be able to be in there for very long, but also how do we expand the window? And that's why these somatic practices are so important every day, right? I mean, it's like the homework for clients. Go for a walk, maybe try that yoga class. You've
Right.
always been curious about drumming. Take a drumming class, take
Yeah.
a pottery class. Oh, you like to garden. Awesome. Oh, it's winter. That's okay. There's hydroponics now, right?
Right. Right.
Right. So it's finding that for them. Obviously I'm biased towards yoga because I'm a yoga teacher, but I also recognize there's so many other modalities that work
Yes.
for people and
I want,
intentionally about that. Right.
exactly. Say more about the intentionality of that.
That's the part that's so important is recognizing like when you go for a walk, you're not doing it to be like, oh my God, I got to get my 20 minutes of cardio in and I got to get back to work and then I got to do this. That's not that intentional piece. It's on that walk, being mindful of it, noticing that bilateral stimulation, noticing the senses around you, using the five senses of like, wow, what do I see around me? As my eyes are wandering, I'm also integrating, right?
Right.
And what do I hear? What do I feel in my body? Oh my gosh, I realize my heart rate is going a lot faster because I'm walking faster. I'm noticing it. So now the next time I start to feel panic, I'm going to notice that same sensation, right?
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Are you preparing for a licensure exam in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, counseling, or behavioral analysis? AATBS is here to help. We have been supporting behavioral and mental health students to prepare for their licensure exams for more than 45 years, working with over 1 million students to succeed on test day and move on to the next step in their career. With products ranging from comprehensive courses to quiz banks and delivered live online, self-study online, and in print, AATBS has test prep solutions that meet every student's needs and learning styles. Visit us today at aatbs.com. That's aatbs.com and use promo code BHT15 to save 15% off your next purchase.
That's so good. I love the way you're tying those things in together. What I like about the physical piece of this, the contracting piece of this, the vagus nerve piece of this, sometimes we're so performance based in our world. We're looking for outcome measures. I went for a walk, but I don't feel better. And what you're saying here is that's okay. The goal is not necessarily to feel better in the moment, but if we do right things repeatedly over time, we begin to just inherently notice the effects of these things. I may not notice an effect if I'm going through grief and I take a walk today, my first walk or my first hike. In fact, I might feel really lousy because I'm already tired and grumpy. And I stepped in some mud along the way or a car honked at me as I'm going down the street. But what you're saying that I'm believing here is that if I do these things repeatedly, the breathing, the breath, the bilateral, some of the contraction piece of this, over time, the accumulated effect of this is going to benefit me. And the outcomes are going to take care of themselves. I'm going to be walking through the physical nature of my grief just by doing these things, whether I'm initially cognizant of it or not.
That's right. That's right. I think it's important to remember, I'll quote two of my mentors. We had a great free event recently, and two of them are Amy Weintraub, and she's a big yoga therapist. She talks about meeting the mood first, right? And so if someone's in that dorsal state and in bed, I'm not going to suggest they go for a walk, right?
Right.
They may try to cancel their appointment and I'll say, oh no, the good news is after COVID, we can do Zoom. And so in that
Right.
Zoom session, I may say, that's okay, be in bed. If you need to have your screen off, that's okay. But we're going to practice some breathing. We're going to practice just some gentle rubbing along your forehead, right? And getting you moving because you have to activate a little. Because as you know, with the way that ladder works with polyvagal theory, you can't go dorsal into window of tolerance. You have to go dorsal, slightly into sympathetic, down into the window of tolerance. And so we're going to just do a tiny bit of activation. Just like if I have someone in my office that is so amped and like they're screaming, raging mad, the last thing I'm going to suggest is let's just rub our temples for a few minutes. I'm going to be like, fortunately, my office is right by a park. And I'm going to say, we're going to go for a brisk walk now.
Yep.
And they'll say,
Yep.
but there's 3 inches of snow. So we're going to go. Right.
Bring your boots. We're going.
That's right. That's right. And then I think the other piece, and that's Amy Weintraub, Dr. Ariel Schwartz, who's also one of my favorite mentors and friends, really talks about holding space with both, right? There's that space of discomfort and pain and what we've been through in the last couple of weeks, no matter where we stand politically, there's a lot here, right? And then there's this piece of hope, of compassion, of support of other human beings. And when we're in that grief response, the two feel very over here. But with these somatic practices, the ultimate goal is this hope, this comfort will hold the pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Really nicely explained. I really appreciate that piece. And I agree with that. I've seen that as well. We were talking just a moment ago about the idea of feeling things intensely and getting stuck in holding on to pain. Have you ever had somebody come in and say, you know what, if I don't stop feeling this pain, I'm going to lose the person that I'm holding, as though there's kind of not just an identification with the person still, but I'm holding on to something. And if I don't feel this, I'm at risk for losing them.
Yes, that is most common. My heart song is working with families who experience the death of a child. I hear that from every parent that I've ever worked with. Right. And so first of all, it's important to honor that and say, of course you feel that way because your child was a part of you.
Yes.
Right. Of course so you first honor that. And then you say, it's okay to feel so many different feelings during this process. And it's okay to know that you'll have those tsunami waves, but in between each tsunami wave, there's a space. Viktor Frankl talks about that, right? Between the stimulus and the response. There is that place of choice, that place of freedom. And so I share that. I think I might have shared that in the last episode, the 90-second rule. Jill Bolt Taylor talks about that, right? Where our brain and our body experiences something so intensely for 90 seconds and then it dissipates. It's not to say that it's not going to come back, right? But there's always a space. And so we start there. And that's the one thing every family I've ever worked with that has experienced the death of a child has come back and said that 90 seconds helped me so much.
Well, what I love about that too, and I remember that from our show, what I love about that is I can endure probably most things, even holding my breath if I need to for 90 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if I know it's going to, remit or, reduce in its intensity after 90 seconds, I can do something during that time with the expectation that the end of this tunnel has an end, that there's really something there that's going to come to a completion. It may come back, but maybe I get better recognizing those 90-second moments. And I get really better at kind of saying, hey, I'm in one of those times. Maybe I bring somebody alongside me. Maybe I do some of the things you're talking about, like the Om breathing. That's a wonderful breathing technique. I really encourage our listeners to master that one. We do some breathing in our work, 4-7-8, breathe for 4 seconds diaphragmatically in your nose, hold it for 7, exhale for 8. It activates the vagus nerve, or exhale for longer. Same kinds of things you're talking about that I absolutely love. And so if I'm going to go to that 90 seconds, I've got some tools that you've given me here that are really going to help me be successful through it. I think part of what I appreciate about your message is not like, well, let's just get through this and white knuckle it. What if I can get through it, but through it, I'm not just healing, but maybe I'm becoming more aware of some things too. And I'm growing in my own self-understanding as I'm going through some of these things. That's part of your message too, isn't it?
100%. 100%. Yeah. And it will always be with us, right? I mean, that loss, especially profound losses, will always be a part of who we are, right? But they won't necessarily be all of who we are.
Yeah. I'll oftentimes say to folks, right now, it just feels like this loss eclipses everything. Yeah. It's just so large. But in time, if we can hold it together, it's gonna shrink, not necessarily in meaning, but it's going to become more manageable to hold. And you're going to find a place in your body to carry this loss and that person that you lost. And you can go to that place and visit them anytime you want, but it's not going to be quite as eclipsing. If it is, you know what to do and you know what to go visit. Maybe it's another round of kind of feeling and maybe remembering them in some very memorable ways. but it will become more manageable over time. And it's not just more manageable over time, but ideally, like you're saying, and your encouragement is we can grow in this process,
Mhm.
which is a really encouraging piece. Let's talk about something here, shifting just a wee bit into the idea, and I'd love you to explain it for us, if you would, heartbreak syndrome.
Yes. It is, and I can never say it totally correctly because I'm not Japanese, but it's takotsubo is how we usually say it in our country. So, and basically, a takotsubo is an octopus trap. And what happens is if we experience intense trauma, intense grief, we can have something called takotsubo myopathy, the type of cardiomyopathy where the left ventricle balloons out, which makes sense, I guess. I've never seen the trap, right? But if an octopus gets caught, which being a vegan makes me sad, it expands right at the bottom, probably where the head of the octopus is. And so what happens is that left ventricle expands. And what we know is that when we experience the death of a partner, we are 21 times more likely to die of a heart attack. However, with Takotsubo, most people do recover, but it does cause some massive heart issues up front. And so, and what we believe it is to be, and there's not a whole lot of research behind it, is that it's just a whole bunch of adrenaline goes, which can
Yeah,
trigger then that what happens with that experience. Similar to other diseases that we can get, it's not necessarily the adrenaline, but it's the cortisol release and the cortisol that doesn't end up dissipating in our system. It stays,
yeah,
which is how we can end up with so many of these different diseases or contribute to. I don't like to say that it causes, but it can contribute, like
sure.
cancer and diabetes and all, and other heart types of heart disease besides Takotsubo. So we know that these things can happen. And so what do we need to do about them? We need to learn one, it happens in our body, not just in our brain, right? And so these tools can help us manage those things when that happens. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes that Takotsubo cardiomyopathy does happen. The good news is most people do recover from it. And we have to work to learn how to regulate our body again so that we don't end up with that adrenaline being stuck or those cortisol levels being stuck.
What I like about that is these practices that just an inherent part of what you do are in some ways a preemptive measure towards. By the way, how do you spell the Takasubo? How do you spell it?
Oh, I have to look at my paper because I can
Yeah,
never
go.
fully remember. It is Takotsubo. Now you can understand why I struggle with it.
Yeah, Takasubo. Yeah,
Yeah.
Takasubo. Yeah, I think that's great. I live in Hawaii, and taco is what the name for octopus is, and actually, it's quite a delicacy. I know you're vegan, but it's quite tasty. We're going to hold both. But
Yes, we're going to also.
the idea here, what you're saying is, we are at risk with the chemical reactions around loss that are just an inherent part of it. There's such an intense time, sometimes beyond words. We can't even have words for it, but our body experiences it at such a deep level. Whether it goes back to our worst fear in life of separation anxiety to the traumatic nature of what the loss may be, and there's going to be that chemical reaction. What I love, though, is that your practices, Amy, help facilitate a working through of all those chemicals and getting those things out, if you will, or worked through in such a way where they're not getting stored and becoming really detrimental to the person.
Mhm, mhm. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many different, hormonal responses that can happen with that and all interconnected with either the nervous system or the endocrine system.
Yep.
We teach, and I'll be doing another one in January, an 8-week series on the vagus nerve, the endocrine system, and the chakras and how they're
Nice.
all interconnected midline,
Yeah.
which can be such a healing modality, right? Of recognizing whether you're Western believing, Eastern believing, or a combination of both, like me, they're all interconnected, right?
You bet. You bet. There's a beauty in that, isn't there?
Mhm.
There's an alignment around that that's pretty neat. Hey, I know we're kind of winding down on our time for today, but I don't want to miss an opportunity to talk about an upcoming event that you guys have in the near future here. Plug that
Yes.
for us, would you please?
Yes, I would love to. It is a night to illuminate grief. It is on our winter solstice, and it's our second one, and we will have these annually. And it's so fitting for the darkest night of the year to have lights. And so it will be a little workshop on the
Mm,
science of grief and somatics. And then it will not be a religious service. However, we are going, like last year, we're going to have as many religious representatives as possible. Last year we had Muslim, we had Jewish, we had Christian, we had Buddhist, we had Native American, all come together and stand in solidarity to show we have to support each other. No matter what we believe, we all have to support each other in our grief and loss. And so we'll do the same thing this year. It's a chance for we light candles on the many different types of losses. And the people that attend in person will have candles to bring up to the front. And then the people virtually can have a candle in their home or wherever they are to say, all these people, ideally thousands in that moment, will be there to say, I've got you.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. It's falling on the darkest night of the year. What a nice pairing with that right there. Hey, Amy, as we wind down, I want to give our listeners kind of a takeaway message for those going through a grief process right now, and really looking to do it in the most effective way that you're encouraging. Effective being, if we can lean into it in right ways and incorporate these things, what would be a word of encouragement that you would leave with them today?
Yeah. One, you're not alone. And there are so many people and resources out there. Number one. Number two, there are so many tools at your fingertips, including on our website, attending our classes. There's never a charge. It's all donation based. Looking to your own community too. There's so many great resources out there. And we are here, and people are here to support, and people are here to support and to show love and animals in this process.
Just a little plug around that piece. I love the emphasis also, and a reminder that animals are such an important part of our lives. We sometimes minimize that. In fact, I just heard something the other day about a veterinarian who had the hardest part of his job was putting animals to sleep. We would imagine that. He said the hardest part is when the owners are not there
Mhm.
because a dog is looking for them.
That's right.
That's an important reminder too, isn't it?
It's so important. And I actually talk about that in that 20-hour training. There's some incredible studies out there on how much animals grieve.
Yes.
Incredible studies. Barbara, can't remember her last name, King something. And I show this video in my training. So I'll tell you a couple, a mommy whale. She was an orca, carried her baby calf for weeks until finally she realized she could. Elephants, there's a huge connection that they stay with them when someone dies,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Ducks, it's not just mammals, it's also birds. It's phenomenal what they do. And I utilize so much animal assisted therapy in my work and
Yeah.
that co-regulation piece. I mean, that's a whole nother beautiful topic that I had to talk. I use a lot with therapy clients in that animal assisted piece, which is a somatic practice too, by the way, right?
We should come back and talk about that. I had a retired seeing eye dog for 5 years that I use as an animal assisted therapy animal
Yeah.
in the clinics where I work. I would love, we've had that on our show before, animal assisted therapy. Great to have you come back and talk about that at some point. For now, though, Amy, I would love folks to be able to follow up with you and learn more about light, get on the event calendar for the solstice upcoming meeting you're going to be having. How can they do so and follow up with you after today's time?
Yeah, they just need to go to our website and the lightmovement.com or lightmovement.org.
Spell
And
light for us.
it's lightmvmt.com, or now that we're a nonprofit, lightmovementspelledout.org. Either one, and go to our events page and it will be right there, and you can sign up for in person or virtually. And it will be beautiful. It'll be on YouTube, and people can, like they did last year, tune in and say,
Right.
I'm in England, I'm in Texas, I'm in Hawaii. I hope you tune in, Graham. And
That's great. That's great. Well, Amy, it's always great to have you on the show. What wonderful work you're doing. And I certainly appreciate learning more about it myself. And I'm so glad our listeners got to be back with us today. Thank you for your time.
thank you so much.
Also want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining Amy and me today. It's always great to have you with us. And by the way, we would love to have you help us spread the word about this podcast to help us grow and reach more people, allowing them to discover the valuable insights that get shared on this show. To help us get out this word, please leave us a review and share this podcast with a friend if you would. We'd really appreciate that. And just a reminder, our episode today and its resources, along with all of our other episodes, can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for being with us on the show, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.